Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Adjustment meeting for October 17th, 2019, which is now called to order. We ask that you silence your cell phones and other devices at this time. If you are not the applicant and you wish to speak on a matter, we ask that you fill out one of these white cards with your information. And we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes and that you not interrupt the board member while the board member is speaking. I will advise everyone we have 3 members today, so any vote will need unanimous approval of the board. So keep that in mind, and if you'd like to request a continuance, feel free to request a continuance so you can have a full board. First item on the agenda is to receive the minutes from the last Board of Adjustment meeting. Do we have any changes or a motion?
Motion to receive minutes.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to receive the minutes from the October 3rd, 2019 meeting. Cast your votes, please. The motion passes. Next order of business is continuance requests and application withdrawals. Do we have any?
Yeah, we've got 3 today. Items 5, 6, and 7, 14645, 14669, and 14663. All request deferral to the November 7th meeting.
We have a motion?
May I be heard?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Eric Groves. I'm an attorney, and I represent the Protestants in case 14666. I have 2 witnesses here with me today, Jace Bradley and Will Hoke. They're attorneys who will testify in opposition to this. We object to a continuance. We've had spent a lot of time getting ready for this hearing, and we would rather have it heard today.
It's a typo on the agenda. It wasn't actually 1466 that's being deferred. It's 645.
That's correct. Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
We'll reflect that accurately in the minutes. Thanks for your comments as well.
I'll make a motion to defer cases as read to the November 7th meeting.
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second to continue case number 5, 6, and 7, subject to the correct application numbers as stated. Cast your votes, please. And the motion's approved. There are no matters on the consent docket. We'll move to items requiring a separate vote.
First item is case number 14662, request of Quality Metal Fabricators to permit metal siding on a building located at 15 Southwest 25th Street.
Is the applicant present? Please come forward. If you wanted to introduce yourself and go over your application.
I'm Ray Rossler, and I don't have an application. The builder told us to come up here. I don't have any information on anything, to be honest with you.
This is for Quality Metal Fabricators, correct?
Metal
Finishing.
Okay. It looks like you're constructing a new metal building on the property.
Yes, sir.
And for that, you'll need a variance because of the exterior siding you're wanting to use?
Yes.
Did you present this application to the Urban Design Commission?
The builder did.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was presented on July 24th with a recommendation according to from the planning department, right? And recommended for approval, and you were required to, on the condition that the south and east elevations include brick wainscot, and they recommended that. Do you remember that, or are you aware of that?
Yeah.
And you're prepared to do that? Okay. Board members, any questions?
No, I went out to the location. It's that area is. I think it's I think it's to be appropriate. It meets all the statutory requisites. That area, there's, and I would ask JJ, is that area's a lot of metal, a lot of different things out, metal buildings out there. It would not be out of line to have another one, right? And I thought it would be in order to have it, and that I could support its approval.
I agree, and I agreed with the Urban Design Commission's proposed changes. I thought it needed to be changed like that, and so I'm glad that they recommended approval subject to that change. There are no more comments. Was anyone else here to speak on this matter? Have a motion?
Make a motion to approve case number 14662 by reason that it meets the statutory requirements for a variance.
I would second it, and that would be also upon the conditions of the requirements as set forth by the Urban Design Commission.
Correct. All right. All right.
A motion and a second to approve case number 14662, the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance subject to the conditions recommended by the Urban Design Commission. Cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Item 2 is case number 14667, request of Bo Jennings for a variance to the required frontage to approved street located at 902 North May Avenue.
Is the applicant present? Okay.
Would you like me to walk through the process, what I'm looking for? Okay. I'm not sure how much you have of the submitted documents that you're able to show on the screen. Essentially, I'm Bo Jennings I'm the Director of Real Estate at the University of Oklahoma. And the university owns a quarter undivided interest in this church property. This survey, as you see now, is a survey that the university paid for a few months ago to show a proposed split of that lot. Currently, the lot where you see tract 1 and tract 2, that is all one tract. The owner of the three-quarter interest in the property is currently Kingdom Life Church. And so it's an undivided interest. In other words, there's no hard delineation of who owns what exactly. We've been working with the church because they have been seeking a loan to do some repairs to their property, but the lender is requiring all interested parties to sign on that loan, which the university is unable to do. So we've been seeking ways to clearly delineate who owns what exactly. So in conversations with the church and in conversations with John Wilson here at the city, we've come up with this proposal to designate, as you see on the screen, tract 1 would be deeded to Kingdom Life Ministries, Kingdom Life Church, and tract 2 would go to the University of Oklahoma. And so the next issue became tract 2 would be landlocked, so to speak. And so with John's guidance, we drafted an easement that the church has signed and granted to allow access to tract 2 through tract 1. Should those properties be deeded out as on the proposed survey?
That's been filed as well, right? The easement?
I'm sorry?
The easement's been filed?
Yes.
Okay. Board members, any questions? Seemed pretty straightforward to me, and I appreciate the context. Makes more sense. Was anyone else here to speak on this matter? Do we have a vote?
I move the approval of 14667 for the reason that all the statutory requirements have been met.
Second.
A motion and a second for approval of case number 14667 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a variance. Cast your votes, please. And it's approved.
Thank you.
Item 3, case number 14668, request of Mason Properties for a variance to the requirement for hard surface paving located at 13508 South MacArthur.
Applicant present? You'd like to come present your application?
I'm Leonard Mason with Mason Properties. We'd just like to omit that concrete drive due to the running track equipment in and out. They're afraid to destroy it. Don't have a problem putting a handicap parking around the building, just mainly the concrete drive that enters the building due to MacArthur being gravel and the lot already being gravel.
In this one, there are several other gravel lots in this area, correct?
Do what now?
There are other gravel lots in this area, correct?
There's several, yeah, up and down that same road.
Pretty familiar with this. I think we've probably granted some in this area before. Board members, any questions?
No, I think we've had several of these before. When it's a storage for heavy equipment, is that correct? You're going to have heavy equipment and other storage?
Yes.
And so I think there were some other times we looked at it, and to actually pave it and you have heavy storage equipment, it might cause damage to the pavement. So gravel would be appropriate, and I think in this case the statutory requisite have been met. And I think staff said there are a number of gravel areas in that area. Is that correct?
I agree. I think the city council is going to address this in the future as well. So less concrete parking lots. So do you have a motion?
Make a motion to approve case number 14668 by reason that it meets the statutory requirements for variance.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve case number 14668 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for variance. Cast your votes, please.
Thank you.
And it's approved.
Item 4, case number 14666, request of special exception of Robin Smith Robinson to allow home sharing at 1321 Reese Court.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you. I'd like to start by just reading the letter that I submitted to Mr. Wilson. It kind of summarizes everything. My husband and I are seeking approval for the special exemption to permit lodging accommodation, specifically Airbnb, for our property at 1321 Reese Court in Oklahoma City. Our home is not located with any special, restrictive, or overlay district. There are no variances, special exceptions, special permits, or conditional use permits that affect development of our home. This includes a voluntary homeowners association. We purchased the home after it had been on the market and unsold for an entire year. We remodeled and fully furnished the home and listed it on the Airbnb platform with availability in June of 2019. We were unaware of the legal requirement to apply for the special exception until our neighbor asked us if we had the license in August of this year. We immediately researched and applied for it as soon as it was brought to our attention. Our home is listed on Airbnb at a minimum rate of $275 per night and allows only verified guests to book. We've had no incidents with noise, parking infractions, nor any communication from our neighbors other than to ask if we had the license. We've had one trash bin notice, although both neighbors who've submitted opposing letters both leave their bins out and or allow their visitors to park in the street. We submitted photos just from last week, and we have more from this week. All taxes have been collected and are submitted by Airbnb. We also, of course, pay property taxes to the city. As a current board member for Bank First, also on the Bank First Audit Committee, the State Fair Board, Leadership Oklahoma Class 33, and a member of the Governor's Oklahoma Venture Advisory Council, I understand the importance of offering a quality experience to families and corporate groups seeking comfortable lodging, and we're very pleased to be able to support our city and state with this endeavor. I respectfully request our application be approved, as we want to be compliant with all laws and regulations moving forward. We submitted documentation. I'm assuming you have that with you. We have all code docs that were pulled showing the taxes that have been collected for the past 4 months in the amount of a little over $4,400. Please note there are over 300 plus Oklahoma City Airbnb properties with over 35,000 reviews currently listed. We are a super host and have a 4.9 rating. We very much enjoy sharing Oklahoma City and everything around with our guests. We submitted a message from one of our guests where our neighbors harassing them, and that is not the only time we've had a complaint of our neighbors addressing them. We have copies of reviews, reasons for stays, so you'll see people are here for funerals, weddings, they're here for tennis tournaments, and I think one of our longer term stays, one of our guests, he's the previous chairman of president of the Chamber of Commerce. Their home had flooded and they reached out on Airbnb, and it's just an older retired couple, and they were there. They've stayed there for over 50% of the time that we've been occupied at different times, and we have a letter from them as well. So a single couple, very highly respected in the community that also rented on Airbnb from us. We also, of course, have photos of neighbors violating codes as well. And we have a message where one of our guests asked if they could play outdoor music, and we requested them and actually canceled them. So we're very respectful, we believe, of our neighbors. Again, we've had no police reports or any direct contact from any of our neighbors of any complaints. We have 6 children, and I think it would probably be a lot louder and a lot more traffic if we actually lived there. I would note that Drew Neville is a McAfee and Taft attorney. They submitted their docs yesterday, and the deadline for submitting docs was on the 11th per the letter, just as a side note. That's really close to about it. We've got, I pulled estimates, I believe. Drew stated that having an Airbnb would devalue his property, and the home, his neighbor actually sold for $200,000 less than their home value just a few weeks ago. And if you pull up all those estimates, all the neighbors are up in their home values except for Mr. Neville, and he's down, and I'm assuming it's because of the lower price of his neighbor that just sold. The staff report recommends that we are approved for this, and I would just respectfully request the same. Thank you.
Before you go, board members, any questions of the applicant?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Mr. Groves, if we could have a few more minutes with the applicant here. I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. Sorry about that.
On the dates. When did you buy the home?
July of last year.
2018?
Correct.
Okay. And it looked like by your documents, your first renter was January 20th?
June.
June 20th. Okay.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, you get grandfathered in and you don't need a variance or special exception.
Right. We were not aware of that. So we have another Airbnb, a much smaller home that we actually did for investment purposes last year. And when we did the research for that home, there was no requirement. And we had such success with it, we decided to go ahead and utilize this for the same. So we didn't realize that. We were grandfathered in on our other Airbnb. So again, we didn't realize that we needed to.
Is there a way that you can address the Protestants' parking concerns?
Sure. I really would like to address that. If you will look at the photos of our parking, and that if you don't have them, I have some here. But we hold around 6 and sometimes even 8 vehicles, and that entire driveway is ours. And if you look at our neighbors, they actually have a much smaller space. I'm not sure, we've not been notified of anyone parking out in the street. In fact, like I said, we have photos of our neighbors having people out in the street, and that's fine. We understand that they have smaller driveways and they may need to if they're having any kind of work done, but we've not had any complaints or no parking infractions that we're aware of. No one's brought it to our attention that anyone's parked outside our parking lot at all.
And I think you advertise this as 6 rooms, is that correct?
No, we did have it as 5 bedrooms, and because there are 5 rooms, but then we read in one of the protest letters that it should only be 4 bedrooms because there aren't any windows. So we did some research on that and realized that was correct, so we changed our listing to 4 bedroom.
So if the special exception's approved, it'll be advertised as 4 bedrooms?
Correct.
Available? Okay.
Absolutely.
board members any questions?
I believe your application said 5, but you had 5 bedrooms. Are you amending your?
Okay, so, and that may be correct. We did not realize that there is a bedroom, but I guess you would call it a room. It doesn't have any windows. It's more of, I would say, a safe room. And so once we realized that after reading one of the protest letters, we changed it. So we're happy to change it to 4-bedroom on the application. It's not a problem. We didn't realize that it was not considered a true bedroom.
My other question is, there's some issues regarding who you're going to allow to use the facilities at one stay. Is it parties invited, or multiple groups, multiple families? How do you plan to, or do you mind if we were to limit, because we're allowed to petition?
Absolutely.
The number of people, number of rooms, and that kind of thing.
Sure. No, whatever, like I said, we want to be compliant. So we're here to allow, we had a group from New York. They were here for a tennis tournament, so there were a couple of different couples that were there. So that would be an example of a group. We've had families that are here for a funeral. We had a family here, their cousin got married. We had another gentleman here, their family came over and had breakfast with them one morning. But we obviously don't want to have any parties or anything like that. I will say that my son is getting married, and I am allowing some of my family members to come stay. We will not obviously be loud or disrespectful, but I will have multiple family members of my family there, just as I would if I were living there. But happy to comply with any kind of exceptions that are needed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Groves? And I will say, for the record, before you start, Mr. Groves, I did receive a protest letter from Mr. Neville, who is an attorney at the same law firm I work at. I haven't talked to him about this matter, and I think that I do not have a conflict for which I would need to recuse, but I wanted to get that on the record. If you were representing the applicant or representing an HOA or something, I might have to reconsider, but just as an interested protestant in his own capacity, I don't think I have a conflict.
Right.
Discuss that with the municipal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some exhibits. May I approach and distribute them?
Sure.
Oh, yes, excuse me, sir. For the record, my name is Eric Groves. I'm an attorney. I represent Jay Spradling, who's a Protestant. We are opposed to the grant of this special exception. For some months now, the applicant has been operating this property as a boutique hotel and an event center. This is not within the spirit or the intent of the home sharing ordinance, and it certainly is not compatible with the use regulations for an R1 district. The facts that I've stated will be substantiated this morning by 2 witnesses, first Will Hoke and then Jay Spradling. Mr. Hoke lives next door to this property and has observed the activity since it began. Mr. Spradling lives next door to Mr. Hoke. As you can see, this is on a cul-de-sac in a very nice neighborhood. And of course, a cul-de-sac is not an ideal location for the kinds of activities going on at this property. It makes parking very difficult. And I'll let the witnesses talk about the extent to which parking has been a problem. But the location is not the best one for this kind of activity. If you look to your exhibit book, I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit G, which is the objection that we filed. It cites to the provisions of the code that apply, and if you look to Exhibit E, it's one of those sections. In addition to the home sharing ordinance, the law applicable to this case involves the general ordinance for special exceptions. And there are standards in that general ordinance, Exhibit E, the second page. I believe I highlighted them. Now, these standards apply to all special exceptions, not just the one for home sharing. And as you can see, if you look at it, the proposed use must be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of applicable zoning district regulations. In this case, the applicable zoning district regulations are R1, allowing a home sharing operation in R1 can only be done by special exception, but of course it has to be genuine home sharing. This is not. And it doesn't belong, this kind of commercial business doesn't belong in an R1 district. It's not allowed. The second standard we want to point out is subsection 3, which says...
I'm sorry, just to interrupt you, are you saying that because of the number of rooms or the fact that they're trying to host larger events, or just by virtue of being home sharing?
No, not by virtue of being home sharing. Home sharing is compatible in an R1 district with a special exception, but this is not home sharing. This is in the nature of a hotel and an entertainment venue. In fact, it's advertised that way. If I might direct your attention to Exhibit A, which is a printout from Airbnb, where the applicant says this is a good space for a group for entertaining, and we love hosting families and corporate groups in our home. Well, I'm not sure what all is encompassed by a corporate group, but it is a larger group. Home sharing ordinance contemplates, originally the practice was that a person would rent out a room to a traveler, and it was part of the sharing economy. That's how it got going.
Or an entire house.
Say again.
Or an entire house. I mean, the ordinance contemplates...
Or the entire house, yes, I was about to say. Or the entire house, yes, of course. And of course, the ordinance in our case makes a distinction between instances where the host is in residence and not in residence. And this is an instance where the host is not in residence, so a special exception is required. And we are not objecting, incidentally, to home sharing in principle. We're not objecting to renting an entire house. We're objecting to the kinds of commercial business activities that are being conducted on this property. And they are advertised as such. If you look to the next page, Exhibit B is a review by Aaron in October of this year, in which he says, this is a great place for a large party hangout. And they gave a good review and said they watched movies as a large group. We're objecting to large groups, not travelers. We're not objecting to genuine home sharing, but we're objecting to corporate retreats, to weddings, to the other kinds of special events that would ordinarily be conducted in a hotel ballroom. There's too many cars, and I'll let the witnesses detail with greater precision what a problem this has become.
Are we hosting weddings here, or are these just wedding parties that are staying here for their event?
Well, ma'am, can we get you to, yeah.
Can you come up and use the...
Just to get your comments in the record.
Yes, no, we have not hosted any weddings. It's not an event center. We allow people to come. If there's a group that needs to come, we had a family come for Parents' Day at OU. You have copies of every single guest. It shows the reservation of how many people are there, and many times they'll tell you why they're coming. So it's typically they're coming for weddings or a city event or, like, again, a tournament. We had we allowed a church youth group that stayed because the dorms at the location, they were not able to stay, but that was something separate. But no, we're not hosting. It's not an event center. It's not a boutique hotel. But I'll wait for my closing remarks.
Yeah,
if
we'll call
want
you back
to.
up, but Mr. Privet had a question for you, so.
If we might return to the standards for special exceptions in general, the first one is that it needs to be in harmony with that particular zoning district, which is R1. When you hear the testimony from the people who live on that cul-de-sac, I think you'll be persuaded that the activities are not compatible with the R1 district. Secondly, the activity must not adversely affect neighborhood properties, but in this case it does. It's an annoyance, it's a disturbance. It's hazardous too, because when the cars are parked around that cul-de-sac, which is cumbersome in any case, and parked along that wall in Reese Court, on the north side of Reese Court, there's a wall that separates this area from the area to the north. There's room for some car parking there. If cars are parked on that cul-de-sac and along that wall, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for emergency vehicles to get into the cul-de-sac and maneuver in the cul-de-sac. So that's one problem. The other problem is just getting in and out of the neighbors' driveways. So it does have an adverse effect, and the witnesses will testify more to the details. So any special exception must meet these standards that are set out in the ordinance, and it is our contention that this one does not. The original spirit of home sharing, as contemplated when this ordinance was drawn, and I participated in it. I represented the HP districts. And at the time, I was concerned that we did not have enough exactitude in the standards. But we went ahead and used the standards that apply to special exceptions in general. This does not meet them, and I think the evidence will substantiate that. So it's not really home sharing, it's a business. And I might add that if the board were to approve this special exception under these circumstances, I think the dominoes will begin to fall, and other people will try to do the same thing in other neighborhoods such as this one, and I think that will be to the detriment of those neighborhoods. We regard it as a public nuisance. It annoys, disturbs, makes uncomfortable all those who live around it. And finally, it's not in compliance with the ADA. You may think, well, why should it be? Because it's a place of public accommodation where the host is absent. Now, my colleague and friend Will Hoke, who's going to speak, did more research on that than I did, so I think he can make a case that the ADA applies to this kind of operation. We're going to ask that you deny this. I think we can shoulder the burden of demonstrating that it is a nuisance and has been these last 6 months, and would set a bad precedent, in my view, for special exceptions for home sharing, if you were to grant it. Will Hoke.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Will Hoke, and I reside at 1316 Reese Court, which, if you can see the above, it's the home that is just to the south, or just below the subject property. As you can also tell from examining the schematic above you, that these houses are very close together. The bedroom that I sleep in frequently when I have sleeping issues is right above the driveway of the subject property. I've slept there for a significant period of time over the years, and I've never had any trouble with noise. We've lived at the property for about 16 years now. Never had any noise-related properties until this summer, when the property began being leased as an Airbnb. In fact, I didn't even realize that it was being leased as an Airbnb until early June, when the first renters, or whatever you want to call them under the Airbnb scheme, arrived. I thought that they were new neighbors, and I went over to greet them and shook everybody's hand and realized during that conversation that they, in fact, were leasing this under an Airbnb scenario, and they informed me that they were there for a family reunion. And there were, just on that occasion, 8 to 9 cars and approximately 15 to 16 people that very first weekend. Obviously, that caused alarm to us. But again, to step back, my wife and I submitted a letter in opposition to the special exemption request number 14666 because of the concerns that we have. And in keeping with what Mr. Groves said, I think the most important thing is that if you look at the advertisement on Airbnb and you look at the manner in which the home has been used, there are approximately 3 major issues. I think the first one is that it's not home sharing in the typical sense. And what I mean by that, home sharing in the fact that there is a resident there, an owner resident who resides there. So we have an absent owner who does not live in the area, does not live in the neighborhood. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is it's not, again, in harmony with the zoning R1. R1 specifically says that the R1 district is the most restrictive residential district. The principal use is single-family residential with provisions for related recreational, religious, and educational facilities that are normally required to provide the basic elements of a balanced and attractive residential area. And it goes on to say internal stability, attractiveness, order, and efficiency are encouraged by providing adequate light, air, and open space for dwellings and related facilities and through considerations of the proper function relationships of each element. I submit that there's no statement in R1 single-family residential districts that provide for a commercial enterprise such as this where they are hosting large groups. There's no statement for a commercial hotel enterprise or for entertaining family or corporate groups, which is how this property is being advertised. And in fact, not only being advertised, but also in fact being used that way. And if I can just recite quickly for the board, this summer, some of the observations that we've had is the weekend that I just described, where there was a family reunion that was hosted at the home. There was also a wedding party or a large gathering to attend a wedding. There was a large group of foreign exchange students that were there for to enjoy getting back together, I guess, before they went back to OU and other surrounding schools. There was another family party. There was a getaway weekend for a renter and her friends. And then there was a weekend of approximately 6 adults and 4 children. So again, these are large parties. They're not small parties. There are multiple cars in the driveway, sometimes cars up the street, et cetera. And those are overnight accommodations where the person is absent. Again, I talked about the fact that the bedroom that I use frequently is right above their driveway. Again, I've never been disturbed really until starting this summer with the vehicle, mostly the vehicle noise and the activity in the front yard well into the evening. There have also been multiple occasions where I've woken up. I'm an early riser on Saturday and Sunday as well. I get up and go and get the paper and read the cut paper before really other people are rising. On at least 3 occasions this summer, not only was I greeted by my newspaper, but there was also trash in my yard. And I'm not saying that there's just an overwhelming amount of trash, but there's trash that I went out and picked up. That's what we do when we are neighbors. I would do the same if my neighbor's trash can dumped over and I saw it. I would go and pick it up and clean it up. The difference being is that it's a neighborhood cleanup. And the difference here is that we don't have a resident who is on site to monitor and regulate the noise and the trash and the other activity that's going on at night. The other thing that I think is important is given the activity that is next door and the type and size of activity, we have a situation where we have inequitable or selective enforcement of certain rules that are not necessarily imposed on hotel and other similar or identical accommodations. That, to me, that's a dangerous precedent that the city or the board is setting in this regard. There is, in this instance, we don't have an inspection of the fire, of any verification that there in fact is a fire, that it meets fire codes or building requirements, or that they have a fire extinguisher, or et cetera, that there's a verification that there is a person from the fire department that goes and looks at those things. There's no electrical verification. There's none of those protections. And I think that that's important because, again, the host is not there and present for that purpose, to regulate that again. The most important thing is when they are not a resident host that is there on the location, it really does impose on the neighbors the requirement to review and police the activities of the transient guests that are using the property. And so unless the resident is going to park in their car and regulate the activity, it's left to me and my neighbors to do that. And I think that that is abundantly unfair given the manner in which the property is being used and advertised. Your Honor, excuse me, Mr. Chairman and Board, I'm obviously here to answer questions in this regard, but obviously the most important thing is that it's not owner-occupied to regulate the activity, given the activity that is being advertised and requested. And that is clear from the attachments to my and my wife's letter. The last thing that I wanted to raise is the issue related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. As you can see from the photos of the home, it's a steep entrance into the front door of the home. The ADA clearly regulates home sharing situations where the host is not present. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that the federal rules consider that a hotel-like accommodation. It is clear that this home is not ADA compliant. And the reason why I raise that, I understand that this board is not required to go and enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act. I understand that and I accept that. The reason why it's important is because of the distinction that was made by the feds when they when they imposed the CFRs, the Code for Federal Regulations, underneath the ADA, and that is that they make a very distinct difference or highlight the difference between homes that are shared, where you have a resident at the location, and those that are not, because they are hotel-like situations. I understand that our code is a little bit different, but it's not different in this way, and that is that this home is being advertised in a different manner. This is different than a lot of the other matters that have come before this tribunal. And in that regard, this application should be denied because of the size and the nature of the home. And for that reason, we ask that the board deny the application. And I'm available for questions.
I think I'll start with a question about the advertised use of this property being unique. If this property were advertised as, or by a practical matter, only families were using this, so, or only individuals, but not used in any kind of corporate way, do you think you would still protest?
I don't know, because that hasn't been my experience with this property. I think the real issue here is the distinction between a owner-occupied and an owner-absent property. Again, because if the owner's there, they're going to regulate the activity, or the individuals will regulate themselves in accordance with a host located or a host on-site property. But I don't know that I would or that I wouldn't protest in that situation. But that's not the situation that's presented is probably the best way to describe it. So I don't know if I would or not.
Okay. And out of an abundance of caution, the municipal councilor has requested that we take a short recess until we can get a full board here, because currently we don't have a quorum. I think Mr. Privet will be right back, but we'll take a quick recess until Mr. Privet returns.
Okay.
I mentioned a quick recess, and true to my word. And I can pose this question to anyone that wants to ask. But
Do you have more questions for Mr. Hook?
Either one. I mean,
Mr. Hook?
Do you think you would still protest? I mean, is the core issue this owner-occupied or absent owner issues, such that if they were present on the premise, you wouldn't object?
Let me make sure I understand the question. Your question is if the owner was present, that I wouldn't object? I think that's probably fair. Yeah, if the owner was present and lived on the premises and was there to regulate the activity, then I don't think that I would have an objection in that situation, because I think that it, in fact, may be in harmony with the R1 single-family residential district provisions. I think the issue is that it's not in harmony because of the nature of it, in that it is more a hotel-like accommodation in this situation.
The board members, any questions?
Yes. You've read the ordinance, of course, and
Yes,
the
ma'am.
ordinance does provide in cases where it's not owner-occupied, as in the case here, that they come here, the applicant comes here for the special exception. Are you agreeing to that ordinance? Are you disagreeing with the ordinance completely with respect to the lack of owner-occupied issue? I'm trying to figure out if you're making a legal argument regarding the validity, we can't do that, but the validity of the ordinance itself that permits that? Because we're here to hear something because the ordinance provides it. Mr. Groves did not object to that part. He objected to the way it was being used, as I recall. I don't want to state for him, but basically he did not object to the ordinance itself and that it could be applied. He objected to the way it was being applied here.
I think that's correct. What we're objecting to is the way the business is being conducted. Now, Mr. Hoke might not object to it if the owner were residing on the premises, but my client, Mr. Spradling, would still have issues because of the largeness and the intensity of the gatherings that are there. Even if Robin were there, it would still cause the same kinds of problems.
And I think that's fair enough. To clarify what I was saying earlier, it's really twofold. And the first one is in this situation we have an absent non-resident owner. I understand that you have a statute or a code that provides for that, but you have to read them in harmony with the R1 single-family resident zoning and harmonize those with this other thing that allows for that situation in certain circumstances. And our point is you've got two problems. One, that we have an absentee owner, and two, it's the size and it's the activity that is going on there. If the owner did live and was still advertising and having large parties, then I think that we probably would come in and object under those circumstances. It really is the combination of those two things where you can't work the home sharing ordinance and have it be in harmony with R1 and the zoning requirements. That's where the conflict is occurring in this instance, and that's where our objection is.
Yeah, if I could summarize our argument, or at least this part of it, it would be that the code allows for home sharing, but at a certain point it gets so big that they're going to come and object. And I think this has reached that threshold for them, if I could summarize it. I think that's probably the argument.
I do think there is some argument regarding the effect of the ordinance and how it impacts the R1. I would like for the municipal counselor's office to describe the impact of the home sharing ordinance and address the issue of the R1 and the ability to have this home sharing ordinance in this area.
So in January, City Council adopted this ordinance to provide for home sharing, and that if it is the applicant's primary residence, then they are not required to get a special exception. But if it is not the applicant's primary residence, that is when they must come to the board, and conditions can be put on the special exception.
Next witness, Jace Bradley.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name's Jace Bradley. I live at 1320 Reese Court. We have 4 of the owners on Reese Court here present today. Paul Reber is on the corner of Hardin Drive. Will is next door to me. I'm at 1320. And we have the applicant at 1321. I object to everything that my counsel has said, but I have some additional concerns that I'd like to express to the board. You can put any kind of conditions that you want on this, but there's no enforcement mechanism. You could say you have to do this, this, and this, and there's nobody to go out there and make sure it's being done. That's evident from the way this procedure has started. You can apply for a special exception, and there's no obligation on the part of the city, apparently, to go out and test and inspect to see if there's a working smoke detector, if there's carbon monoxide sensor. It just doesn't happen. And I'm of the opinion that the staff doesn't have the manpower to do this with 300 homes all over the city. The ordinance needs to be changed. I mean, there's a fundamental flaw in the ordinance. These standards are unconstitutionally vague.
It could be, in effect, what your experience is, but there's certainly enforcement mechanisms here. I mean, you can call code enforcement, have them check the property and see if it's compliant with the ordinances, including any conditions that this board would put on any approval if we were to approve this application. If it's found not to be in compliance, then they come back before the board and risk losing that special exception. So there are all kinds of different enforcement mechanisms.
I don't know what's going on inside their house. The city has the power to go inside their house to determine whether there's a smoke detector. I can't do that. So I can't call in and do that. I could call in if there's parking in the street, but the health, safety, and welfare issues that are evident in this thing are the city's responsibility. It would be analogous to a builder submitting a building permit to build a home and being handed a certificate of occupancy, and he walks out the door, and the city just trusting him to build it according to the codes. It's ridiculous. The inspection process that goes along with the building of a home is the same type of inspection process that should be used with the confirmation that the standards of the exception are met prior to the grant of the permit. This is you grant the permit, and these conditions are put on it, and that's the end of it. There's nothing more. And you're leaving it to us to speculate as to whether there's a fire suppression system in there. Every hotel I've ever been in has a fire suppression system. In every bedroom, there's a sprinkler system. They have one working fire. The requirement is one working fire extinguisher in a home this size. That's ridiculous. There ought to be a fire extinguisher in every bedroom. There ought to be a fire extinguisher in the kitchen. So, how are we going to know whether they've done that? We won't, and they won't tell you. Their advertising doesn't tell you, we're violating the ADA. This home does not comply with the ADA. And if you asked them to put that in their advertising, that would be a real question to see if they would admit publicly that they're violating the federal law? I bet they wouldn't. Their advertising wouldn't change. So theoretically, somebody who does have problems gets on the internet, sees the house, great. They roll up in a wheelchair and they say, "Oh, we can't get in." And they don't know it, and the person who's renting doesn't maybe tell them that they have these problems. So there's a problem at the front door. The car stacked 4 deep, 2 wide, would create a health, safety, and welfare issue if an ambulance had to get up there to take somebody out, or the fire department had to go in and rescue somebody up those stairs. It's just not compatible in this situation with a single-family residential home. We've lived there for 23 years and have had a quiet R1 use surrounding us. In June of this year, our world changed. 15 people go in the house, cars parked out. You know, when they're stacked 4 deep, 2 wide, the guy on the front wants to get out, they all have to back out. They park those cars on the street. They stay there for a period of time. We've seen it.
I guess I'll have to interject here, because what we need to consider for the purposes of this application is how this proposed use for home sharing differs from a use that they could otherwise legitimately have, which would be if they lived there and had 6 cars there, they'd have that exact same problem. And so there has to be something different that a home sharing use adds that for our purposes of this application. And it's the same thing with some of the other violations that you've alleged. I mean, it's something about this application has to be unique from all the other applications in order for us to consider, and then we'll consider approving or denying it.
Well, the difference between an owner-occupied unit and a non-owner-occupied unit is that the owner can manage the situation. With a non-owner-occupied unit, there's no supervision. So
I understand that. I'm just saying if they lived there and conducted home sharing, or not, or if they just lived there and had 6 people living there, each with a car, the person in the front had to back out, everyone would have to back out in that exact same circumstance. So something would have to be different about the virtue of its use as home sharing for us to deny the application on that basis.
Well, my position is that, as it's been articulated before, this is not home sharing. There's no sharing involved. This is a business being operated in a R1 residential district. When you boil it all down, strip away all the wallpaper on this thing, this is a hotel being operated next door to Will, across the street from me, and just up the street is where Paul is. So that's what I'm saying, is that it's not an appropriate use. You haven't met the standards that are included in the ordinance, and it should be denied, and I would strictly request that the application be denied. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Board members, any questions?
I have a couple. We have in the past, dealing with where something is located and how it's situated with the special exception, limited the number of people who would be allowed to stay, or the number of sleeping areas, and also the number of cars. That kind of condition we're allowed to do. We've also restricted advertisement for the Airbnb type of situation as to how it can be utilized. So I'm just putting that out there for you to see if there is any kind of suggestion that perhaps with that we could look at a condition limiting, say, to 2 cars for the driveway, or 4 people or so, 3 sleeping areas or something like that, instead of the other part of the house. We wouldn't, the kitchen and all that, that's different. But we can look at limiting that. The cul-de-sac is a very crowded area. I've been there. I don't think any car should park off of the cul-de-sac unless it's an emergency or on the off the driveway, unless you just have something moving in or something like that. And I agree with you on that, but I I was thinking of looking into limiting or recommending the limitation of the number of cars, the number of sleeping areas, and the number of people in the advertisement. And I'm just putting that out.
I'll let my attorney respond to that.
Of course, the board, when it grants a special exception, can do so subject to conditions. And I know that you can do that with variances too, and I know you do from time to time. And that is within the discretion of this body. It's a quasi-judicial body. You have discretion. I'm reluctant to agree to conditions unless they would completely eliminate all of the hazards and annoyances that this presents. We'd have to hear what they are. But one of the problems here is, since I was involved in crafting this ordinance at the beginning, the staff doesn't really have the personnel to enforce this. Someone makes an application, and JG, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any city personnel go out and look at the property, do they? No. So if there were to be conditions imposed, we lack an enforcement mechanism. If the council were to ask me, should we have one, I'd say yes. I'd say you need to hire a person or two in the nature of code enforcement to police this particular kind of activity because it's widespread around the city. This one's just too big. The facts are what they are, and there's no indication that their practices are going to change. Now, if you issue an exception, you can condition it however you wish. But I'm reluctant to agree to it because it leaves it up to us to enforce it. And that we will do if need be, but we think it's an unfair burden on the neighborhood. In conclusion, I think they've failed to shoulder their burden to show that they can conduct this in a way that's consistent with the ordinances and consistent with the standards for special exceptions. So we'd like you to deny it. Thanks very much.
The applicant wanted to address any of those issues?
Sure, and I'll try to make it quick because I know we're over time here. I just wanted to start off real quick. I think when we start talking about, we mentioned the sharing economy, and also respectfully, Mr. Groves, you mentioned 6 months. It's been listed for 4 months, just to make sure that's clear. So I'm the previous CEO and co-founder of We Go Look, and I was a very early adopter of the sharing economy and gig economy. Actually helped pioneer that here in Oklahoma City on a global stage 10 years ago and exited about 2.5 years ago. My company always, as we traveled and Airbnb started becoming popular, that's where we would stay whenever we would go to conferences and things like that. Again, we have a very large family. We have 6 children and 2 of us. So when we're going to lacrosse tournaments or any kind of vacation, we'll stay at Airbnbs. We love staying at the big homes. They have, all the amenities of a home, right? You have washer and dryer, a full kitchen. Typically, you have an area for children. We've made the downstairs all about children. So I think when we start looking at talking about here, family or group for entertaining, we're talking about outside. We have a beautiful backyard there. We have a patio. It's very well landscaped, so it's very nice. When we say entertaining, we're talking about cooking out, enjoying time and relaxing with your family. We're not talking about entertaining with a DJ or any kind of event center whatsoever. Happy to change the wording if that is misinterpreted by anyone here. So I just wanted to put that out there first as you were looking, because Oklahoma City needs these kind of homes. We have a lot of people that come here. As you all know, tourism, the state fair, we have millions of dollars that come into this marketplace and people needing to stay in places like this. So just, again, we're happy to help with that. As far as showing that we have fire extinguishers and carbon monoxide detectors, happy to put those in our listing, take pictures or submit them to anyone here, mail them to anyone here at any time. I have an inspection platform, so I can do it and send it any time if that's necessary, if that makes people feel better about the fire extinguishers. I would also say, you haven't seen any photos. We've heard about trash being in the yard, or cars but there's been no photographs submitted. We've not received any kind of police reports. We've not had any noise disturbances. No one's called this in. This has all become up since we requested the special exception. We do have photos of our neighbors, and I will, can bring this up to you, because this is just from yesterday. We submitted trash and also have illegally parked in the cul-de-sac. And that's from just last night again. So I just wanted to mention that. As far as ADA, if you go deep into our listing, we're very clear about there are stairs and you have to be accessible. It's not wheelchair. You have to be able to climb stairs. And when you book, all of that information, we have house manual, all the information's there once you actually book. So if that would make people feel better to put that in the listing, that it's not ADA compliant for whatever reason, I'm happy to do that as well. Again, you can look at the number of guests that booked. Over 50% of our occupied times has been by a single couple and not by a lot of people. Again, I know we don't have to be living there. That's why we're here for the special exception. I'm trying to remember anything else. We do have video monitoring at our home if that's important. We see who comes in and who comes out of the home with Nest.
Do you have any noise monitors?
No, we do not have any noise monitors. Happy to install some if that would be. I'm not familiar with those. This is all still new.
Other applicants have come in and listed that as a feature of their home, that they can monitor the noise. If it gets above a certain letter, they go out or send someone out. So let's see if you had that there or not.
I'm happy to look into that for sure. One of our neighbors mentioned, having to police our guests. We would respectfully ask that they stop talking to our guests. I think that's it's unusual. They've not reached out to us at all. This is the first time I've ever, even my husband or I have seen them, and have been in the house, living in the house prior to that. So I just, again, we're in compliance with the law on everything here. We're providing a really nice home for families to come here. It's a big investment for us. So when there's someone saying that there's no supervision, that's not correct. Again, we're catering to more of a higher clientele as well. Stephanie, she's there every single week, making sure everything's clean and well stocked. We furnish coffee. We really try to make it a wonderful experience for our Oklahoma City guests. So that's really all I have. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You may have mentioned this earlier, but where do you live?
I live in Edmond.
Okay. And you said Stephanie here manages the property, or do you manage the property? Or
we kind of do it together. So she helps clean. She also manages if somebody, one of the three of us go by, we take out the trash every single week. We both work downtown. Andy and I both do, so we're able to swing by at any time. But she makes sure that everything's stocked and clean and ready. We have landscapers that come every week.
Board members, any questions?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Will Hoke again. I haven't seen the photo, so I don't know what that is about what happened yesterday or last evening, if I may see it.
Well, I mean,
Looks like a neighborhood.
yeah, I don't really want to get into the tit for tat because anyone can do that in any neighborhood, right? So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment there. We haven't made any police reports because we're good neighbors. If I have an issue with Mr. Spradling, then I go next door and knock on his door, and he and I talk about it. Same and vice versa. But I didn't know, it's not our burden to bring forth photos and other pictures, but of course we can do that if that ever became necessary. And I think the other thing that's concerning to me is the issue about the admission of not being ADA compliant. And I think that is something that this city should be concerned about. If we are going to be welcoming to people from other states, other communities, we need to be fully welcoming. And we need to be fully welcoming of people that are different than us, that are disabled, and that are able-bodied. And I do think that that's very important, that these homes that are being operated like hotels professionally need to be fully compliant in that regard. Thank you.
I agree. I don't really need your comment, so you can take a seat if you like. But I agree, but I think that's an issue to challenge the ordinance and not. I mean, if we accepted that, we would just deny every application that came through because the property wasn't ADA compliant. So I think it's an issue with the ordinance and not necessarily specific to this application.
I've rented a bunch of B&Bs or stayed in them, but I've never rented one out. Is that an option for amenity to add handicap access, or is that to your listing, like if you had a wheelchair ramp or?
I'm assuming it is because there's a place where you put in the notes. You let guests know if they have to be mobile enough to access stairs or not. So I would have to look to be able to tell you exactly where it's at, but I know it's in our listing talking about that. I don't know if it's a feature that Airbnb has as like a certificate or anything, like a badge, because that's not something we've ever had. So I agree. I think that we should be able to help all people, but I also know that Airbnb doesn't require it. So it sounds like that's maybe more of an issue between the Airbnb platform and city regulation versus our specific home.
Yeah, I think that's where the fight
federal,
would be
yeah.
between ADA and these type of things would be.
Yeah.
Airbnb.
Is anyone else here to speak on this matter? Okay. Board members, any comments?
Two things. I'm asking the municipal counselor's office or staff to both. In the current situation where only 4 rooms would be available, does the ADA kick in, or do we know on that issue regarding our ordinance? I know it's under federal law, but.
Right, I would have to research further when the ADA compliance is an issue, but that's not something that the city enforces. That'd be a complaint with the Department of Justice.
So if we wish, we could put that in there, and the applicant appears to be agreeable to add that it's not accessible or ADA compliant in the advertisement if we wanted to, and wouldn't have to get to that issue. I had understood it had to be 5 or more rooms, and I didn't hear the CFR site, but there was somebody who mentioned CFR, so.
I think, not the easiest case, but still an early case, particularly in this area. This ordinance is still relatively new. I think probably going to go through some kind of evolutions in the next few years. If not, it'll just all be in front of us, and we'll have to deal with these issues. I don't know that I've heard enough that makes this property unique. I don't know that there's a particular difference between advertising or a use by corporate attendees, corporate tenants, than normal residents. I mean, these are individuals too. They're still people. It's not like you're having robots in there. They're still people. I know something I'm particularly cautious about, as well as other board members, and it's changing the character of a neighborhood in a substantial way. I think the city council contemplated that and still passed an ordinance that allowed for home sharing in limited circumstances with review by this board. And all that to say, what I'm saying here is, if the entire neighborhood became Airbnbs, obviously that would change the character of the neighborhood, or a large percentage of the neighborhood became Airbnbs or home sharing operations, it would change the character of the neighborhood. And I don't think the city council intended that. And so we're keeping a watchful eye on that. I don't think we have that in this circumstance. I think that you would still invite protests even if you had one room that you wanted to rent, particularly if it was off-site, absent owner. Even if you were there, though, I think you would invite protests. And so I'm trying to see what is different about this. What we've generally done here is set several restrictions and a very short time period for a special exception. Some restrictions that I think would be appropriate is advertising it as no on-street parking. So strictly driveway-only parking. You have a large driveway there that can accommodate a lot of cars. Only advertising 4 rooms available for rent. And depending on how the board feels about this, I think maybe striking any mention of inviting corporate clients. I think that would address some of the concerns. And if it happens to be a corporate tenant that wants to stay there, they're going to see 4 rooms and know whether it's an appropriate property for them or not. So I don't know that you have to put that in there. But in any event, that's the restrictions I would propose. And I invite comments from the rest of the board members.
I concur with with you with regard to the discussion. The council adopted this after hearing everything and reviewing everything and put in the situations where home sharing could be and when special exceptions would be required. I think the home sharing would have to be approved under our current ordinance, and I don't think there's any basis for denying, but I will add that on the conditions, this is the kind of situation I would want to recommend 1 year, 1 year time frame from the issuance of the special exceptions. It's an annual renewal, and you were asking if you had any way to review that. Well, they would need to come back again at the end of a year for another special exception. We'll have more experience by that time. Also, when they get their home sharing, it's renewed annually. Is that correct? It's renewed annually.
The license is...
the license is renewed annually, so you will have some way to get back. On the 4 rooms, it's a big house. Are you talking about sleeping rooms or just period, just 4 rooms? Because you walk around the house, you may have, I don't know how many rooms you actually have, but, well, I guess 4 rooms. I would want to limit the number of cars or vehicles.
So it's advertised as only a certain number of cars are allowed?
Yes, only a certain number of vehicles. I was thinking 2, but maybe that's too restrictive. Maybe 3 in this case. It's a larger house and you have a bigger driveway.
I was thinking probably 4. This is the largest driveway I've seen on any of these applications.
Okay.
So, I mean, I would say 4. I'm happy to do 3, though. I'm only one board member.
And some kind of advertisement, I agree on. Don't say too much about what corporate versus this, and no parties, of course. But I think adding it's not accessible, ADA accessible or, wheelchair accessible, to put that in there to be sure. Even though we don't have a resolution of the ADA, I think they need to put it in there to be cautious. I would also recommend you on these non-owner occupied houses, a monitoring system I would like to see a monitoring system.
They've got video right now.
Yeah, video, right.
That Nest has also got audio, but it's on the front
That's
porch.
fine then. You have a video, that's fine. That would be it for me.
In regards to the 4 vehicles, when my family's there for my son's, so we'll have people staying there, we're able to still have 6 or 8 cars in the driveway because it fits, and then it's fine.
Yeah, and what we're talking about is how it's advertised on these various platforms, with the understanding that enforcement is difficult, but what we can regulate is the different representations that you can make on your advertisement. And so this is how it would be advertised, is 4 cars. That's not to say that sometime when your family's there or whenever, there's going to be 5 cars there. But, but we're saying it's advertised, it needs to be advertised as 4 cars.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Can you just come to the microphone to get their comments in the record, sir?
Is there a mechanism for communication between the neighbors and the city, the neighbors to the neighbors? Like, all this is well and fine, but like I said, if there's no enforcement, then...
Yeah, the city has an action line that you can call and report suggested violations or actual violations. So the city has an action line for that, and then they'll investigate. I also would encourage you to exchange phone numbers or some kind of contact information.
Right.
We can't force that, but I would encourage you to, just so
Okay.
sort those issues out ideally. So. We have a motion. Before we have a motion, I did not agree with the ADA requirement personally, but that's just me. For the advertising it as not ADA compliant, I did not agree with that. So. I would invite you to probably consult with an attorney before you do that. But, yeah.
So what about the accessibility issue? She's not advertising that. She's already putting that in her ad.
Well, that's up to her. I just wouldn't want to put that in what we approve. Okay. Ma'am, did you want to speak on this matter?
I don't know if I can talk about it.
If you could, you can. We welcome your comments. If you could just come to the microphone so that your comments are in the record. And state your name and your address as well.
I'm Jessie Ann Wallentine, and I live at 6212 Hardin Drive, which is one house away from Paul Reber. And as a former realtor, the worst thing that could happen to a neighborhood is to have a bunch of cars in the driveway overnight. And anytime I was a realtor and people were buying a house, I would suggest that they'd say, what's the neighborhood like? And I would say, you need to drive by in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, or different times and just see if it's the type of neighborhood you want to live in. And we really tried in this neighborhood to have our cars in the garage. There are obviously times that you have children, and if you have a two-car garage, you can't do that. But a lot of the houses have driveways on the side as well as circle driveways in the front. And to have a bunch of cars loaded up in front of a house, 4 cars is absurd. We've had that happen, and we've tried to not have it happen. And there is no room on that street to park in the street because the way the houses come to each other, there are just 3 houses on that street, and the driveway is about the only room to park in front of. So to say to load 4 cars at a driveway would disrupt our entire neighborhood. It would be really, we've tried not to have cars that park in the garage. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. To the applicants, would allowing 3 cars be a burden? Would you need 4 cars, or can we solve this by permitting 3 cars?
I would just have to look at the guests that are coming. I don't know if you do have someone coming out of town for a funeral or a wedding or whatever it might be. I don't know. Again, it's a 6 to 8 car driveway. We also have a garage. And again, our neighbors consistently park in the street. We've provided photos of them doing exactly what she's saying. So it's not fair to come in and say we're doing it when there's not even any photos of that for us, and we're providing the proof on that. But I would be hesitant to say less than 4.
And
I don't think that's fair.
the garage is accessible by the guests?
Yes, they don't have obviously garage opener. They're able to open it once they get in, and they could pull in. In fact, Stephanie pulls in anytime they're there cleaning. We try to limit the view there. And again, many of these people are there for only short periods of days, and they're not always, some of them don't even drive. Some of them take Uber from the airport. So it's not like there's constant vehicles there. So something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to just correct the record about this one issue. It is very rare that there are people on the street in that cul-de-sac. This last weekend, my wife had a baby shower, so there were cars, and that, in fact, proved the point, and that is that it makes it very, very difficult to maneuver in that cul-de-sac with cars. I think there are probably 7 different ladies that came over, or 8 different ladies, so there are 8 cars there, and it was very crowded and very difficult. But it goes to the point. It is rare that there is ever a car on the street in this cul-de-sac. Everybody has large enough driveways and garages, and their cars are put away or out of sight.
Okay. Yeah, there shouldn't be any with this home sharing. That's fine. That's fine. There shouldn't be any with this home sharing special exception because we're limiting it to driveway parking only. So if it happens, it presumably will be the owner that's there on some event.
That's my one other comment that I always say is that's a street, so you can park on the street, even though it's not a good idea to park at a cul-de-sac, but, on street parking. That's not illegal, but in this case, we're asking you in the ad not to have them park there, and I think if you could put a couple or 1 or 2 in the garage and the other 2 on the driveway, that'd be perfect.
we have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the special exception for 1 year, that advertising only 4 rooms and no street parking. Is that it, I think?
Yeah, and advertised as up to 4 cars only.
Okay, 4 cars only.
I think you mentioned this, but that it, with a specific finding that it meets the statutory conditions for a special exception.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14666 for the reason that it meets the statutory conditions for a special exception, subject to the following conditions. 1, no on-street parking, or that the property will be advertised only as having the following: driveway-only parking, no on-street parking, 4 rooms available for rent, a maximum of 4 rooms available for rent, and it's not advertised as hosting corporate events, no reference to advertising corporate events, for a period of 1 year. Cast your votes, please. And the motion's approved. I believe all the other cases were continued. I have no additional items, communications, or board reports. Any citizens to be heard? Board member comments? We're adjourned.
This is my last.
Oh, Diane's last meeting. Absolutely.
Diane.
So we want to
Sayonara.
we want to thank you for your diligent service. I've always welcomed your comments. I know you're very diligent, and you visit a lot of these properties and do a lot of research that's very helpful to the board. So I've appreciated your membership on the board.
I've enjoyed working with all of you all. Thank you so much.
We've appreciated you very much.
We're adjourned.